What's going on, guys? Welcome to Miniature Mayhem. My name's Chris. Today's tutorial I've got a nice and easy method for painting Kharadron characters, specifically Dagnai Holdenstock from the Cursed City box set. All of the methods used in today's video are really simple and should help you smash out your KO characters in literally a couple of hours. If you do find this tutorial useful, I'd massively appreciate it if you head down below and click the like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get on with the video. Unlike the rest of the Cursed City box set, I've base coated this model with lead belcher spray as it's predominantly going to be metallics. Just make sure you've got this all over and there's not too much black showing. It doesn't matter necessarily underneath the model, as we'll cover the majority of that later. With all the metallics I'm planning to use placed onto the wet palette, I'm going to start with Warp Block Bronze and start picking out some of the metallic areas I want to change. I've never painted a character before for the KO, so I was just working through and picking out as I thought it would look cool. The paint's quite thin, so it will take a couple of thin coats to cover fully over silver. For the next base coat I used Screaming Bell and picked out a few more areas that I thought would look cool. Typically I was going for vials and things that look like copper tubing. As I was finishing each section I was just sort of holding it off at a distance and seeing if I thought it needed anything else in different areas. The final metallic colour I'm using is Brassy Brass, produced by Vallejo. I use this as the base colour for all of my gold areas. I was quite sparing with this at first, but eventually I think I decided to paint this as Barak Zilfin, so I used some more gold later on just to block out some more areas, as that's part of their main colour scheme. For my Cursed City set I've kept the basing really simple and just used a base coat of Dawnstone Grey, followed by a wash all over of Nuln Oil, and I'll come back to that later once I've done the skeleton under the KO's feet. With the wash on the base drying, I decided to add a wash to the rest of the body as well. In this case I've used Agrax Gloss mixed with medium, which gives it a bit more of a satin feel and takes away some of the gloss effect. I've applied this all over all the different metallics to tie them all together a little bit and give them a nice bit of shading. For my version of Dagnai Holdenstock, I decided to paint him in the colours of Barak Zilfin. For this I used a base coat of the Fang. You may need a couple of thin layers of this to make sure it's got a nice even coat, especially over the silver so you don't get any of the glittery pigment shining through. For all of the leather areas, I just applied a base coat of Mournfang Brown. In this case I've applied it to the complete under tunic, as well as his legs, and also to his gloves and the strap holding his eye patch in place. Sticking with the theme of Barak Zilfin, I decided to use Avalon Sunset to pick out some of the yellow areas. Don't worry, when we come in with the washes and highlights, we'll tone this down a little bit so it's not so contrasting. To give the new paint from Games Workshop Hobgrot Hide a little test, I decided to use that to base coat the ropes here, and there's also like a little pouch of something on the measuring device on his back. For the skin I used an all over base coat of Bugman's Glow. Just be careful here and try not to get this in any of the areas you've already base coated. Coming back to the base now, I'm just giving the texture paint on the floor a little dry brush of Longbeard Grey. For the skeleton on the floor I used a base coat of Xandru Dust and started picking out the bones. For all of my armies and units I do unfortunately paint the rims Steel Legion drab. It's just a personal preference, but I literally do it for every single model and it just feels weird holding a model when it's not done. For the leather and fabric areas I then went round and applied a wash of Agrax Earthshade. Once that's dry, everything on this model will be base coated and washed, which is a really nice point to sort of step back and take a look, especially if you're testing out a new scheme, and see if it's what you want to go ahead with. To tone the yellow back to a more cloth-like appearance, I've added a small amount of Rakarth flesh into Avalon Sunset and using that as a highlight colour. I'm just working my way around the edges with a really fine tip brush, and don't worry if you do make a mistake, you can go back with Avalon Sunset and tidy up. I also added a small dab of Rakarth flesh into Mournfang Brown to work around the leather as my highlight colour. If you do use the same highlight colour for each of your different colours, it can create a really nice unified effect when you stand back afterwards. Using a mix of the Fang and black mixed with Lamy and medium in roughly a 2:1, I created a glaze to put some shade layers down on the inside and the outside of the cloak. To soften the previous glaze up, I created another one using the previous base coat and just applied this where the two colours meet. And now, using rust grey as a final highlight colour, I'm just working my way around all the edges and some of the sharp points and adding some little flecks and scratches around all of the cloak. To highlight all of the golden areas, I've used Vallejo's Glorious Gold and worked my way around the model, just picking out the raised golden areas. It was at this point I decided, being Barak Zilfin, they needed a little bit more gold, so I also painted the shoulder pads and reshaded and highlighted those as well. For the silver armour, I just applied a highlight of Ironbreaker. As a highlight for both the bronze and copper areas, I applied a layer of Hachette copper. I applied some of this as an edge highlight, and in some places more as a kind of volumetric highlight where I thought that it would catch the light. Using the technical paint Nihilakh Oxide, I've gone around the copper and bronze areas and applied some oxidization. I added this into some of the deeper recesses, and when there was large flat areas or sometimes little holes or rivets, I just applied it to the area and then dragged it down to create like a streaking effect. For the dwarven skin, I'm applying a highlight of Cadian flesh tone. It was at this point that I noticed how terribly I'd highlighted the leather strap on his head, which don't worry, I will come back and fix later. Using a 2-in-1 mix of Cadian flesh tone to pallid witch flesh, I'm just picking out some of the more prominent features. I'm going to glaze this back later, so you can be quite daring with this. Using a 1-to-1 mix of Cadian flesh tone and pallid witch flesh, I'm applying the final highlight to the skin. I'm applying this in such a way that it applies a sort of texture to the model, like the facial features kind of wrinkled. And the reason for this is I'm going to glaze it back later with Cadian flesh tone. This is a great way to quickly paint loads of exposed faces. Using that Cadian flesh tone now, I'm just pulling the paint towards those highlighted areas, which actually as it dries creates a really nice transition. For the eyes, I'm just using a fine tip brush to apply a small amount of Chaos Black into his eye socket. To paint in the pupil, I'm just applying 2 small dots of white, a slightly larger one to the outside of the eye and a slightly smaller one to the inside. Using Chaos Black, I've come back in afterwards just to refine the shape of the pupil a little bit. First by applying a line underneath the eye, and then making the pupil just slightly bigger and more towards the centre of the face. As the final touch on the model, I just applied Mephiston Red to the eye lens, and then highlighted it with Avalon Sunset with a small point in the corner. And with that, Dagnai Holdenstock is now complete. Obviously you can apply these techniques to any of the KO characters and even some of the bigger vehicles. If you do want to pick up any of the paints or models shown in this video, please check out the link in the description below for Element Games for up to 20% off, and that'll also help to support the channel. If you did enjoy the video, please don't forget to subscribe, hit like if you haven't already, and share us with a friend who you think might also find this useful. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys.